Good morning everybody and welcome to our first PBRF webinar, Staff Eligibility, and I can see we have got 27 of you here today, which is fantastic. So welcome and well done navigating any of the technology that you might have had to navigate to get here. As you'll see, we'll start with introductions and we'll talk a little bit about the format and how things are going to work this morning. Introduction, so I'm Sharon. Some of you have met me either online or face-to-face. I'm the comms and support person. We've got Amber here with us, who's the program manager. We've also got Blair Whiteman and Mayu Yagahashi. They're from KPMG, the audit team, and they'll be here to expand on any matters relating to eligibility and particularly evidence. So the format today, we'll talk about and expand on our key points, and then we'll answer some commonly asked questions that have come from you guys. Your mics are muted. I'm sorry to do that to you, but as you can imagine with the number of people here, it's really the only way to manage it. If you do want to ask a question, you'll see there's a little green question mark icon on the control panel. So ask away. We may take a while to get to your question, or it might be better, we might decide that it's better to answer it offline, just depending on the volume and the nature of the questions. But also, please be rest assured that all questions that are asked here will be answered and published on our Google information site. So nobody's missing out on anything. Now, just a little disclaimer as well. This is not guidelines per se. The advice that we're going to give is of a general nature. If you do want a specific determination or some specific advice, just talk to us offline. Okay, and I'll just say one other thing. If the technology gods don't smile on us for any reason today and we have to quit, rest assured that we will we'll record this and it'll be available and uploaded within a few days onto our Google site.
And it'll include the slides.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so what's the purpose of today? We want to clarify any points that may have been seen complex or ambiguous in the guidelines, to sort of connect the parts of the guidelines for you guys, to provide opportunities for questions within the confines of what I just discussed, to sort of create some more confidence out there for you and to spell out the process in clear steps. There's a really broad audience of people here today, so there's a big range of experience. So please do bear with us if you feel like the presentation's not pitched exactly at your level of knowledge or experience. We're always here, remember, on the phone or via email. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, we'll talk about the changes in this round. The being New Zealand-based criteria, then the other 4 criteria, eligibility, FTE, the substantiveness test, contracts. Then we'll also go on to have a wee talk about non-TEO staff, new and emerging staff, and other considerations such as leave, concurrent and transferring staff. Okay, what's changed and why? So I just want to say, in this webinar, we're only going to talk about changes that are related directly to staff eligibility. There are some other changes and they relate more to, they fit better with our second webinar, which is putting together an EP. It's going to be on the 6th of July, and there'll be a third one in early August about submitting data. And also, once again, a plug, you'll see there's an FAQ on our website and on our Google site that asks about changes. Okay, so the changes. Overseas staff no longer eligible. We'll talk about that in a minute. FTE is now defined as it's 37.5 hours per week, so any FTE should be worked out on this basis. And that was put in place to ensure consistency across the sector. So one FTE, 37.5 hours. This includes any non-research or teaching activities, but it excludes non-paid hours. There's a cap of 1 FTE, regardless of any paid hours that somebody may do over 37.5 per week, or where separate contracts total more than 1. Okay, the new and emerging criteria that's been revised and tightened somewhat. This was done to ensure that it was clearer and more explicit, and that it reinforces the principle behind the new and emerging category. That is the intent of encouraging investment by TEOs into new and young researchers. There's a sector reference group paper on our website. It's paper 11 if you wanted to delve into new and emerging further. The guidelines are super new and improved, we think anyway. So there's more examples and there's more clarification, just a richer picture really. And the staff data file has replaced the census file. And that's been done to more clearly reflect the data that we're collecting, which is not everyone, like a census would do, but just those who are submitting an EP. Right, moving on. So, the big question that we're trying to answer today is, how do we determine which staff are eligible to participate? Are they New Zealand based is the first thing we need to ask. And do they meet the 4 criteria? Now just a note here, this criteria is about teaching and research and the connection of these. So the principle that underpins these criteria is that the individual is expected to make or has made a substantial and independent contribution to degree or postgrad teaching at a TEO in New Zealand, or research activity at a TEO in New Zealand, or both. So as TEOs, you need to look at all degree and postgrad teaching staff and staff doing research only when you apply these criteria. Right. Being New Zealand based. Now, this requirement came from a cabinet decision, and it was put in place essentially to reduce complexity in the QE. The sector reference group and the TEC set out to define what constitutes a New Zealand-based researcher in consultation with you guys, with the sector. Now, if you want to see more in-depth information about this, have a look at the staff eligibility sector reference group paper on the website. But essentially, to work out if somebody is New Zealand-based, you need to ask this. Is a staff member a resident in New Zealand for more than 50% of the period that they're employed? Or are they a resident in New Zealand for less than 50% of the period they're employed, but they're employed for 0.5 FTE or higher? Okay, we've had a few questions about being New Zealand based, so let's have a look at one of them now. And Amber's going to be our resident question expert answerer. Okay, Amber. So here's a question that came in. How do I work out if staff are considered to be New Zealand based? Do I base it on the percentage of the year that they live in New Zealand, or the percentage of their contracted working hours spent in New Zealand?
So here, what each TEO needs to think about is the percentage of the time that the person is actually in New Zealand with their feet on the ground. So we've used the term live, and that's what we're really looking at there. So if the person is actually resident in New Zealand, they've got their feet on the ground for more than 50% of the 12-month period of their employment, then they would be considered New Zealand based. However, if a person doesn't have their feet on the ground for more than 50% of that same 12-month period, and their contract value is 0.5 FTE or higher, they are also considered New Zealand based. So if someone is basically out of the country for more than 50% of the year and they are less than 0.5 FTE, they would be considered to be overseas based and therefore not eligible to participate.
Okay, thank you. Let's take another one. And I think this one's for you, Blair. It's talking about evidence. What kind of evidence might we need to show that a staff member is New Zealand based, and what will you guys be, as auditors, be looking for?
Yeah, now Sharon, like many areas of the PBRF audit, we're looking to understand the process that you, as a TEO, have followed to be satisfied that your staff member is New Zealand based. We'll explore approaches that TEOs are taking in this area during our process assurance audits, and if required, we'll issue more guidance. But Section 423 of our audit methodology does give a little bit of guidance here, and we'll be looking for travel documentation, accommodation or residence information. Teaching timetables or evidence of contact time is helpful here. Leave requests and also timesheets. And like many other areas, if you've got staff that are affected by this, we certainly would expect you'd have a file note explaining to us how you've reached your conclusions.
Okay, thanks. Good to hear from the auditors because we've had a few questions about evidence. Cheers, Blair. Okay, so we've established that this staff member or our staff members are New Zealand based, and now let's have a look at those 4 criteria. Okay, the first one is eligibility. Oh, that's a hard word to say. Eligibility date. So this means essentially that they must be employed between the 15th of June 2017 and the 14th of June 2018 and employed for at least 1 year on a continuous basis. So that's employed or otherwise contracted. And I think, Blair, you had a comment here?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is it can be at any time during this year, and it does need to be continuous employment. And the guidelines go into what that looks like in more detail, but previously TEOs have faced unexpected challenges with this rule when they've had staff on 9 to 10 month or academic year contracts that are rolled over each year and don't meet the continuous employment test.
Okay, thank you. 4.2.3. Okay, just a question. Somebody was saying that I think Blair, you referred to 5.4.2.3, I believe. Now that is in the audit methodology, is that right?
That's right. So it's 4.2.3 on page 6 of the audit methodology, which is different from the guidelines.
Yeah.
Under the heading Minimum Standards of Evidence for the Staff Participation Audit.
Right, and so that audit is up on our website. It's also, to be honest, it's probably easier to find if you go to our lovely new Google site. And I'll just send out maybe a follow-up email after this, just pointing everybody to the resources. Okay. Moving on. Is that the question we just... No, it wasn't. Okay, another question for you, Blair, about eligibility dates. What evidence is required?
Yeah, I'll pass to Mayu for this one. So Mayu.
Okay, yeah. So based on experience, I think employment agreement and contract for service normally include employment and contract dates, but also HR payroll information, system records, or timesheet would help us.
Okay, thank you. And looks like we've got one more question about eligibility. This one for you, Amber. So if a staff member who's eligible can have a gap of 1 month between contracts. What about several gaps adding up to 1 month? Is that okay?
So thanks, Sharon. No, unfortunately. So the guidelines do set out that only one single break is allowed, and so it is important that TEOs keep that in mind when they are looking at their contracts.
Okay. Thanks, Amber. Okay, the second criteria is FTE status. So we already talked about the 37.5 being 1 FTE. Just note that FTE is calculated for the 12-month period from 15th June 2017 or the appointment date of the first eligible appointment if that was after that date. You can't just arbitrarily choose which 12-month contract period that you want to use to calculate FTE. And also, again, as I said, it's capped at 1. Okay, so it has to be a staff member if they're New Zealand based for more than 6 months. It's a 0.2 minimum throughout the duration of their employment. And if they are New Zealand based but less than 6 months, then it's a minimum of 0.5. Okay, another question here about FTE. So we have a full-time staff member who's dropped to part-time for this year and next year. Is she still eligible for inclusion in our portfolio? And how do we calculate her FTE? Again, back to you, Amber.
Thank you. Okay, so this person would be eligible if they meet all the eligibility criteria and continue to be employed for at least 0.2 FTE during that period. If someone dropped to a part-time position that was 0.1, that would make them ineligible. So you do need to think about that part of it. It was different from last time round, from the 2012 round, and in terms of how you calculate their FTE, this is where you need to look at the FTE throughout the 12-month period, and there are examples of how you actually calculate it in the guidelines as well.
Okay, thank you. I've just seen a question there from, I think it's Dr. Gander. Hi, how are you? We might take that one offline. It's a great question, but it's probably a little bit specific for here, so don't worry. We'll attempt to answer it today or tomorrow for sure. And everybody, Dr. Gander's question will be available for you to look at as well. Moving on. Oh, another question on FTE. Okay, so what about if we specify FTE in the job offer, but not hours of employment? Amber, I think, well, maybe Blair wants to speak. Oh, Amber and Blair, I'm going to ask you both.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. So what you need to do is probably go back to your HR department and check with them, because HR do generally tend to calculate hours in order to work out annual leave.
Right.
Yeah, this is relatively unusual in our experience, and certainly we'd be looking for actual evidence of the hours the person has worked to confirm their FTE.
Okay, thanks, Blair. Right. Excuse me. Okay, criteria 3 is the substantiveness test. I'm going to, substantiveness is a difficult word to spell and say, so please excuse me if I make a mistake. Do we want to answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, we just had a question come in, and this is regarding eligibility. The question is, dates. If a new staff member commences in September of October this year, does that mean they're not eligible, as they will not have been in continuous employment for 1 year by June 2018?
Yeah. So as long as their contract is for 1 year continuous going forward, then that's absolutely fine. So they do need to be employed at any point, the start date at any point in the 12-month period that we've set out, so from the 15th of June. Just double checking that one.
So it kind of has to bridge it, is that right?
So it's a bridging period. Yeah.
Okay.
And to take that further, they could have been hired in May 2018, and the same principle would apply.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that question. Okay, the substantiveness test. Okay, so staff must meet the test for teaching or research or both. Okay, let's look at teaching. Does this picture ring a bell for anybody? Okay, do they fulfill a major role in the teaching and assessment of at least one course or equivalent? So just to talk about major role briefly, okay, so this means that this individual contributes at least 25% overall to the delivery of the course and the corresponding working time to the assessment process or design of the course, or both. So you need to think about all aspects of teaching here, the design of the assessment process that the staff member is involved in, regardless of the component. It includes workshops, tutorials, lectures. If their contribution of at least 25% is in more than one stream or multi-stream, or it's watered down, if you will, if it's split into components of less than 25%, then they're not fulfilling a major role. So take an extreme example, they were contributing 2.5% to 10 courses. That's not meeting the 25% description.
And I think one point to note here, Sharon, would also be that effectively the substantiveness tests for teaching and research haven't changed significantly from previous quality evaluation rounds. The sector reference group did make some clarifying points just as in response to questions from the sector. But in essence, there hasn't been a lot of change here from a previous quality evaluation round.
Okay, thanks, Amber. Okay, a question now. Does supervision and assessment of students to use lab equipment count if there's an assessment?
So thanks, Sharon. So no, I think the difference here is if you think about the the type of supervision here. So under the substantive tests for research, it does specifically talk about academic supervision. In a lab environment, you're most likely talking about technical supervision of students, and the assessment of those students is usually not, or is also not considered to be the same as the design of the assessment of a course. So no, we would not usually consider this.
Okay, thanks, Amber. Okay. So, what about staff who are teaching on pathway programs, those that lead into a degree? Do they meet the I told you I couldn't say it, substantiveness test for teaching?
So with this one, so you do need to look at the course. So yes, if the course is taught as a part of a qualification, so if it's a certificate or a diploma, and that particular course does actually form 1 or more years of study towards a degree, these are considered by the TEC to be included as degree level courses.
Okay, and I think Blair, you wanted to make a comment here too.
Yeah, I mean, you and your TEO understand these courses best, so we'd certainly expect that you've got explanation and again evidence for how these courses fit into a degree level program. So you'd be referring to your course books and the programs for your degrees.
Right. Okay, thank you both. So the second part is the research substantiveness test, which asks, does the staff member undertake design of research activity, preparation of research outputs, and the academic or the academic supervision of graduate research students. So just also important to bear in mind here is the definition of research as per our guidelines. It's original, independent investigation that contributes to knowledge and understanding. It doesn't include activities that are part of routine standard practice, things like routine testing, data collection, and teaching prep. Have a look at the TEO guidelines for the full definition. Okay, another question. So we've got a staff member employed at 0.2 to supervise 1 or 2 postgrad students, but they don't deliver any teaching. Does that person meet the substantiveness test for research?
So the TEC would consider that to be meeting the substantiveness test for research because we don't specify any number, or we don't prescribe any number of research students that have to be supervised, just that they are supervising students.
Okay. Okay, and the fourth criteria is about their employment contract, and it says a staff member's employment or service contract functions include research or degree or postgrad level teaching or both. So that goes a little bit, I guess, to evidence. Mayu, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. So in our experience, the most TEOs have this covered, and normally employment or service contract functions state this. But if not, TEOs still have time to fix it before. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, well, I think that goes a little bit to the next question, in fact. So if a staff member meets the substantive test for teaching or research, or both, but their contract doesn't specify these functions, are they automatically not eligible? So
yeah. So no, they wouldn't be. And the diagram that the TEC actually put into the guidelines this time around does specifically identify that that this isn't an automatic no. So we do expect that that TEOs will make changes in order to meet all of the criteria, but
okay.
It's not an automatic non-eligible.
They're not shut themselves out. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so thus far we have established that our staff member is New Zealand based, is employed on the right dates, meets the FTE criteria, meets the teaching or research criteria, and has a contract which supports all of the above. What else is there to think about? Okay, so non-TEO staff. So this is staff that are contracted to a TEO from a non-TEO. In this case, they have to meet the 4 criteria and the strengthened substantiveness test, which says that they must be teaching during each year in New Zealand for 3 years, bridging the eligibility date of the 14th of June, and they must meet the substantive test for research. So, so note that we've got the longer period there, and it's an and as well with the research. Okie dokie. So, an area that has generated a few questions has been the new and emerging researcher part. And Amber, I'm going to just turn this a little bit over to you to talk to.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. So, because we, well, the TEC reframed the new and emerging researcher criteria, a number of questions has come up around this. So the sector reference group did review it based on feedback from the 2012 quality evaluation and the Cabinet decision to increase the weighting for new and emerging researchers in the funding calculation. And so what we looked at was going back and making sure that the criteria aligned well to the original principle for introducing the new and emerging category, which was to ensure that that new and emerging researchers who were new to independent research for the first time in their career within the period were supported.
Sorry.
Okay, so in order to work out if one of your staff members, one of your researchers is new and emerging, first you need to identify that, that your staff members are eligible, obviously meeting the 4 criteria, and then you need to look at whether they are new and emerging. So the first sort of sub-criteria really is, did they start doing substantive and independent research for the first time from the 1st of January 2012, and were they not eligible for, or PBRF eligible in a previous quality evaluation round? So we'll touch on the first one there, or the first sub-criteria, which is, are they doing substantive and independent research for the first time in their career? So in that sense, I think what's important to look at is that supervised research doesn't count. It has to be independent research. The research could be in or outside of academia. So in previous rounds, if a researcher had a academic career or had a research career outside of academia and came into academia for the first time in the assessment period, they could be considered new and emerging. That's no longer the case. It really is about being a new independent researcher for the first time in this period. And it also doesn't include activities that are routine standard practice or technical functions.
Okay, thanks, Emma. There was a question, PhD and new and emerging seem to come up a bit in question, so I'm just going to ask you this one. This came in. One of our PhD students was named on some outputs in 2011, but their role in the research was under supervision. Does that make them ineligible for new and emerging status?
No, it doesn't, but you do need to document sort of how you determine that that person was under supervision and their input was supervised in that piece of work. Okay, so the second aspect of the second sub-criteria for new and emerging is that someone was not PBRF eligible in a previous round.
So I think the best way of working through this one, Amber, might be to use this question that came in. Does the criteria 3, that means the one about not being eligible previously, does that mean that the staff member was employed in an eligible role and submitted an EP and was named in the census, or does it mean that they were just employed in an eligible role or the equivalent, say, in another country?
Yeah. So, so basically it's A, to sort of take a short answer. So the only way that a staff member can be PBRF eligible is to meet the PBRF eligibility criteria. Employed for a year on the census date, as it was referred to in previous rounds, in the relevant year, in a substantive role. So, for example, that would mean that a staff member who was employed between 2008 and 2010 in a PBRF eligible role, theoretically, isn't actually PBRF eligible because they weren't eligible during the 2012 PBRF eligibility period.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, I mean, I think that you know, it is also important to consider that there's nothing in the guidelines around being eligible under sort of equivalent in equivalent countries or anything like that. So
that requirement's been taken out.
Yeah, that requirement has now gone.
Okay. Yeah, we've had a few questions on new and emerging. So if a staff member was previously employed in an academic role before the current assessment period, does that make them automatically ineligible as new and emerging, Amber?
So you'd need to actually have a look at their role, so basically you need to look at are they doing independent research for the first time from the 1st of January 2012. So that is what you need to identify.
Another one, from my reading of the guidelines, it seems that someone who submits as new and emerging can only be given a C rating. Is that correct? So should a researcher who seems likely to get B or higher avoid submitting under new and emerging?
No, the short answer. So new and emerging researchers can be awarded an A grade, a B grade, a CNE grade or an RNE grade. So what is important is that if a new and emerging researcher doesn't have any research contribution items, they're not going to be penalised for that. But if they do have items, we do encourage TEOs to actually submit those, because it could be the difference between getting a CNE or a B or possibly an A.
So they might miss out.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. And I believe we have another one. And this one's about career change, and it's been asked a couple of times. So if a staff member had an earlier career, say they were a marine biologist, then they left that and then 10 years later they became a psychologist. Can we say that they're new to research in their discipline? Does it mean that they would be new and emerging?
No. So there's a staff member in that position wouldn't be considered new and emerging because they actually do have a research background. But I think it is important that those people do have the opportunity to explain that, and that's why the new platform of research contextual summary section of the EP is useful, so they can actually talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've had a question come through asking how non-TEO staff will be audited.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first key thing is non-TEO staff have to meet requirements in the guidelines, which are the 4 general eligibility requirements and then the strength and substantiveness test. But I'm assuming this question is intended to be a little more practical about how the audit will actually look at them. So we'll look at the 4 eligibility requirements based on your TEO's contract with the non-TEO. So you have to have a contract in place. And then regarding the strength and substantiveness test, we'll be looking for evidence that this person has had a role in the teaching and assessment of course, and the research design, preparation or supervision for the second part of the test. And in terms of evidence around that, you'll need to collate sufficient evidence to demonstrate both of those. So teaching timetables would be obvious for the teaching part, and then for the research part, there'll be outputs likely within their EP that you can get a bit more information on. And if they haven't been employed exclusively by your TEO over that period, you do need to collect evidence for all 3 of those years bridging the census.
Okay, thanks, Blair. I hope that's clear for everybody. Thank you very much. All right, so moving on away from new and emerging now. Other considerations, so that's transferring staff, staff who are concurrently employed and staff that are on leave. Okay, so PBRF eligible staff who leave one TEO after the 15th of June and then they got 2017 and go to another one before or on the 14th of June 2018, they're called transferring staff. Okay, and here is a question that's come up about that. So our staff member left our TEO in July 2017 and began work in August 2017 at another TEO. She's eligible at both. Who submits the EP? Who gets the quality category? Who gets the funding? Amber.
Why, thank you. So the TEO that employs the staff member on the 14th of June 2018 is the TEO that submits the EP. The organisation or the TEO that submits the EP gets the quality category in terms of that organisation is the quality category is recorded against that organisation. However, with the funding is split between the two organisations, and the guidelines actually do set out how the money is, or the proportion of money is split between the two organisations, depending on when somebody starts and when they finish.
Okay. Thanks, Amber. Okay, there's another sort of scenario, and that's what we'd call concurrent staff, and that's those that are employed by 2 or more participating TEOs, and they're eligible at both. In this case, the funding for such staff can be shared by both. Important to note, if they are employed by 2 or more TEOs, but they're only eligible at one, obviously they're only counted by that one, and they're not considered to be concurrent. And a question, and really it's more or less the same question that we just had for transferring staff. So working for one TEO on point 3, another one on point 5, eligible at both, who submits the EP, who gets the quality category, and who gets the money?
And it's me again. Okay, so in this case, the TEO with the highest FTE, so the TEO where someone was employed at 0.5 in this case would submit the EP, and again the organisation that submits the EP gets the quality category recorded against their results, and the organisations split the funding between them. So in this case, organisation 1 would get 0.3 and the other one would get 0.5. The important thing to note, I guess, is if the FTE was more than 1 across the 2 TEOs, we would prorata it.
Okay, thanks, Emma. We just had a little question come in here. Who's responsible for telling the PBRF that a transferring staff was working at another TEO?
Yeah, so really, if you've had a staff member who was PBRF eligible, you should just put them in your staff data file, and it's the TC's responsibility to go and match them up. So you will get some warnings or some messages in your staff data report when you submit it through the PBRF IT system that will tell you if an EP has or hasn't been submitted by another organisation. So so that's a check that we can do at our end.
Okay, thank you.
Yep,
and we've just had the same question come in from 2 different people. Must have ESP, and it's saying, what if the FTE was 0.5 at both TEOs? Then who submits?
That's a very good question.
They can choose, I believe.
So yes, so the staff member chooses. Is that right?
Yeah.
I can't remember that
in the guidelines.
It is. I think it's in. Yeah,
it is in the guidelines. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's the questions there answered. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. So just to go back. Yes. So in answer to that question, the TEO where the staff member has the highest FTE should submit. If it's equal, as in the scenario that you guys have just pointed out, the two 0.5s, the staff member should choose the organisation through which they would submit their EP.
What page number is that on?
That's on page 25 of the TEO guidelines. Yeah. Okay. And staff on leave, are they eligible? If they're on short-term leave, yes, they are. So that's all the usual kinds of short-term leave, sick leave, parental leave. I mean, other things being equal, of course, in terms of eligibility. And long-term leave, possibly with conditions. And I'll just read out those conditions. So if they're on long-term leave on the 14th of June 2018, they're eligible if their employment agreement requires them to return to their substantive role within 1 year from the start of their leave. And secondly, that anybody who's been recruited specifically to cover their duties does not have an EP submitted in this QE.
We just had another question come in. So just touching on the situation where both people are employed at 0.5 FTE, the question that we've had coming from Auckland is that how would we treat the funding in that circumstance? Is it split evenly?
Yes, it is. Okay. Great. Just looking through our questions.
They're flying in now.
We're having a few questions coming in, folks. We're pretty much, as you can see, that's our content now. We'll just have a quick squiz through the questions, and if you want to put anything in now, if you just give us a minute offline to have a wee look at them, that would be much appreciated. I think that's it. Don't go away, folks.
Hello, we're back.
Hi.
So we're just going to touch on 3 questions that have come in.
Okay, Ben asked, are we doing any more of these webinars, particularly around assessing outputs of creatives and artists? We are doing another webinar, and we're doing 2 more actually. The next one will be about putting together an EP, but we do have to draw a fairly clear boundary between, our job is to sort of say what an EP should look like and all the bits that need to go in there. What we can't really talk about is the quality of the research per se, and there's a lot of good stuff in the panel specific guidelines.
Yeah, it's difficult for us. So the job of the panels is to do the assessment. So the TEC doesn't provide advice on how the outputs will be assessed, but the Creative Informing Arts panel guidelines are very, very useful and quite detailed, comprehensive.
Lisa's?
Yeah.
If someone was in an eligible role in 2008 2010 but not employed June 2012, but they're re-employed now and they're in an eligible role, I've lost my question. Are they new and emerging for this round?
So provided they have undertaken research, well, they meet the criteria really, so they really do need to identify whether that independent research was undertaken for the first time as of 1st of January 2012, but this person would be considered new and emerging in that case.
Okay, thanks, Eva. And this is from Liz. For overseas-based staff, we have staff based overseas, and there are 1.0 FTE. They'll be employed on the 14th of June 2018. They won't be living in New Zealand at all. Please advise on their eligibility.
Yeah, so if a person is not living in New Zealand for that period, they do have to be over 0.5, and so in this case, if someone is 0.1, then they would meet that requirement.
1.0. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
1.0. Amber, I think you can answer
Yeah.
that one. Yeah, and another one, does somebody need to have a PhD or other terminal degree to be considered new and emerging?
No, they don't. So it's not a requirement to submit a thesis as part of your evidence portfolio if you're a new and emerging researcher.
Okay. Another one, does research have to be specified in the staff member's contract, or can research requirements be specified in the annual performance review? Leah?
Yeah, so this is the 4th eligibility requirement, which does state that their employment or service contract functions include research or degree level teaching, and we would expect that to be in their contract. And like we mentioned before, there is still time to get it put in there if that's required.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, more questions keep flying in.
Do you want to go? Do you want me to read the top one?
No, I don't think we can do that.
Okay. Just to reiterate, if you have asked a question and we're not answering it, it's because we either think it might be too specific, or we just want to be really clear in our answer and take a wee bit of time to put it together. So you'll definitely get a response very, very soon. So please don't be offended or annoyed if we don't speak to it right here and now. Anything else there?
Okay.
No. Okay, well, I think that's it from us, folks. We do appreciate your attendance. Just again, going over the other ways that you can get help from us, and that's our inbox. Our 0800 number is working now, and I've put it up on our Google site as well. And that's the address for the Google site. Have a look at the audit methodology. It's a great read, especially if you're having trouble sleeping.
Thanks, Sharon.
I'm just kidding, Blair. I think that's pretty much all we wanted to say. Yeah.
Well, we did get one more question come in that we think we could answer just before we sign off. is the 0.2 FTE over the eligibility period or just 0.2 FTE as per their employment agreement? So
It's as per the employment agreement.
Yeah.
Because you could be employed the day before the PBRF census date and be at 0.2 FTE, and that's what will be recorded in the PBRF unless you're transferring from the TEO or there's any other factors at play.
Okay, so just to reiterate, this has been recorded and we will then load it up and there'll be a link on the Google site hopefully within the next 24 hours unless we run into any technical difficulties, but it will be there. So thanks again everybody, have a great day, and our next one will be on the 6th of July and that's going to be about putting together an EP, followed by a more technical kind of one in early August about actually submitting data. So thank you and goodbye.